The jungle had a way of swallowing sound, as if every cry, every whisper, every footstep was consumed by the thick walls of green. Thomas Cole tightened his grip on the machete, each swing of the blade carving narrow progress through the suffocating vines. Sweat rolled down his neck, mingling with the grime of a week spent lost in this alien wilderness. His supplies were low, his compass broken, and yet he pushed forward. He wasn't alone out here. He couldn't be. Behind him she stumbled but kept pace, her green skin gleaming in the shards of sunlight that pierced the canopy. Her name was Celera, though Thomas still stumbled over the syllables. She was not of Earth, not of any world he had known, and yet her presence was the only reason he hadn't given up. They had met by chance, two survivors of disasters that had stranded them both in this uncharted hell. Where language failed, determination spoke louder. The air was heavy with the scent of rot and flowers too sweet to be harmless. Birds with scales instead of feathers screamed from the treetops, while insects the size of fists droned around them. Every movement felt watched, every shadow hinted at fangs. Celera walked lightly, her instincts sharper than his, eyes flicking to dangers he would never notice. Thomas trusted her judgment, though he carried the blade. She trusted his courage, though he was only human. They had been searching for higher ground for 2 days now, convinced that somewhere above this endless green, they would spot a landmark or smoke from a distant settlement. Celera's people might still be out there, or maybe other humans lost like him, but the jungle fought their every step, dragging them down into its humid depths, daring them to quit. Still, neither of them stopped. Not when survival had already demanded so much. Celera moved ahead, brushing vines aside with her hands, humming softly in her own tongue. The sound was strange, almost mournful, but it kept Thomas steady. He found himself listening more than watching his footing, and that was when the ground shifted. Roots slithered beneath the soil like snakes, and before he could call out, Celera screamed. The jungle itself had risen against her. A massive plant, its maw wide and lined with jagged petal teeth, erupted from the earth. Vines shot forward like whips, wrapping around her limbs and torso in seconds. She struggled, clawing at the bindings, but the plant only tightened its grip. Thomas froze for a single heartbeat, horror locking his muscles before instinct drove him forward. He hacked at the vines with his machete, sparks of green sap splattering his face. The plant shrieked, a sound like air escaping a dying beast, and reared higher. Its gaping mouth loomed over Celera, drool like nectar dripping onto her skin, burning faint welts. She cried out, fear twisting her features in a way Thomas had never seen before. She was a warrior in spirit, but even she could not match the crushing strength of the jungle's hunger. Her hands clawed at the vines, strangling her chest, but every second they pulled her closer to the waiting maw. Thomas roared, swinging with all his strength. The machete bit deep into a vine, severing it, but 2 more lashed out, striking his arms and nearly ripping the blade away. He staggered back, heart pounding, yet he did not retreat. This was no time for hesitation. If he faltered now, she was gone. For the thought of continuing alone, without her strange songs, her sharp eyes, her stubborn fire, was unbearable. Celera's voice broke through his panic, a single cry in her language, pleading. He didn't need to understand the words. The meaning was clear, save me. Thomas gritted his teeth, charging again. He ducked a whipping vine, brought the machete down on another, and tore at the bindings with his bare hands when the blade slipped. Sap burned his skin, but he didn't care. Pain meant nothing if it bought her another moment. The plant's maw snapped shut inches from her face, missing only because she twisted at the last second. The sound was deafening, a wet crunch like bones breaking. Celera screamed again, this time in fury rather than fear, thrashing against her captor. Thomas seized the opening, slashing through the last vine binding her waist. She tumbled free, hitting the ground hard, gasping for breath, but the plant wasn't done. It lunged again, vines writhing like serpents, snapping toward both of them. Thomas barely managed to haul Celera to her feet before dragging her back, swinging the machete in wild arcs to keep the tendrils at bay. His muscles burned, his vision swam, but his focus was absolute. He could feel her weight against him, unsteady, trembling but alive. That was all that mattered. They retreated step by step, the jungle floor uneven and treacherous. The plant's roots tore through soil and rock alike, pursuing with unnatural hunger. Celera regained her balance, pulling free of Thomas's grip and reaching for a stone dagger at her belt. She met his eyes briefly, and in that shared look was a vow they would not die here. Not in the belly of some mindless beast. Together they turned to fight. Thomas swung low, hacking at the base of the writhing mass, while Selira darted in close, slashing at the tendrils with swift precision. Their blows complemented each other, one human's brute force balanced by an alien's grace. The plant recoiled, shuddering, but it refused to release its claim. Its gaping maw loomed closer again, a nightmare of dripping teeth and darkness. Thomas bellowed, driving his machete deep into the plant's stem. Sap erupted like blood, spraying both of them in sticky green fluid. The beast shrieked once more, thrashing violently. Selira leapt onto its twisting body, driving her blade into the softer tissue beneath its maw. The two of them fought as though possessed, fueled by desperation and raw survival. The jungle shook with the struggle, birds scattering into the sky, unseen predators slinking back into the shadows. Finally, with a sickening rip, the plant collapsed. Its vines twitched, curling inward, then stilled. The maw gaped one last time, then sagged, lifeless. The battle was over. They stood over its corpse, panting, covered in sap and sweat, alive by the narrowest margin. Thomas dropped to one knee, exhaustion hitting him all at once. His arms ached from the relentless strikes, his hands raw where the vines had burned him. He could barely keep his eyes open, but when he looked at Selira standing tall despite the welts across her body, pride filled his chest. She had been seconds from death, yet she still carried herself like a survivor. Selira staggered toward him, reaching down to touch his shoulder. Her words came haltingly, her accent thick, but he understood. Courage. Human. Her eyes shone with something more than gratitude, something deeper, unspoken. He gave a weak laugh, shaking his head. Reckless courage, maybe. Still her hand lingered, steadying him, grounding him in the storm of his own exhaustion. The jungle settled back into silence, but neither of them trusted it. They knew this was only the first trial in a world designed to consume the careless, yet something had changed in that fight, something they both felt. Alone they had only survived. Together they had fought back and won. Thomas rose slowly, wiping sap from his blade. He glanced at Selira, whose silver hair clung to her green skin in tangled strands. She was bruised, battered, but her gaze was fierce, determined. He realized then that he wasn't protecting her. They were protecting each other. That bond mattered more than any weapon. They pressed on through the jungle, leaving the carcass of the plant behind. With every step, the memory of her cries, her near death, burned brighter in Thomas's mind. He had never felt fear like that, the kind that clawed at your soul and demanded you act no matter the cost. And yet, in that crucible, he had found strength he didn't know he had. Selira walked beside him, closer than before, her arm brushing his occasionally as if seeking reassurance. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them was filled with something new, a fragile but unbreakable trust born in the heart of danger. The jungle was still vast, still hungry, but for the first time, Thomas believed they might actually carve a path through it. And as the vines closed over the corpse of the monster behind them, the jungle seemed to watch. It had tested them. They had endured. Now it would test them again. Night descended on the jungle like a suffocating shroud. The canopy above blotted out the stars, leaving only the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi and the restless hum of unseen creatures. Thomas crouched near a small fire, carefully shielding the flames so they wouldn't attract unwanted attention. His machete rested across his knees, but his eyes were fixed on Selira. She sat across from him, silent, her gaze distant as if replaying the moment she had nearly been swallowed whole. Her skin still bore the angry welts from the plant's burning nectar, faintly glowing in the firelight. Thomas had cleaned the wounds as best as he could with strips of cloth and water from his canteen, but he knew infection was a risk. She didn't flinch during his work, though the pain was obvious. Strength was woven into her bones, but so too was weariness. He recognized it because he carried it himself. For hours they said little, their silence filled by the jungle's chorus. Every rustle in the brush felt like another predator closing in, every bird call a warning. Thomas's nerves frayed with each passing moment, yet whenever his gaze landed on Selira, calm washed over him. She wasn't unafraid, he could see the tightness in her jaw, but she was unbroken. That steadiness was a lifeline in the chaos. At last she spoke, her voice low and halting. "You... save..." Her hand gestured toward him, then to her chest. "Life? The words were awkward, but the meaning carried weight heavier than the vines that had tried to crush her. Thomas felt heat rise to his face, scratching at the stubble on his chin. "Couldn't let you go like that," he muttered. "Not after everything." Her eyes softened, though he could still see the warrior beneath. She reached for a vine of berries hanging nearby, carefully testing them before offering a few to him. "Eat," she said simply. He hesitated, but she nodded, her certainty reassuring. Trusting her knowledge of this world, he accepted. The fruit was bitter, but it eased the gnawing hunger in his gut. It was a small moment, but in it Thomas realized how much he relied on her instincts. Alone he would have starved or poisoned himself long ago. The fire crackled, and Celira began tracing shapes in the dirt with her finger. She drew a crude outline of the jungle, or at least what Thomas assumed it was, then marked a point with a sharp jab. "Danger," she said, then circled another point. "Safe." He leaned forward, trying to follow. Though her map was rough, it gave him hope that she wasn't just wandering aimlessly. She had some idea of where they could go. When fatigue finally overtook them, they set shifts. Thomas dozed lightly, machete within arm's reach while Celira kept watch. The night stretched endlessly, filled with distant growls and the unsettling hiss of insects too large to be real. He woke once to find her staring into the darkness, eyes glowing faintly. She wasn't just watching. She was listening, her entire body tuned to the jungle's rhythm. It struck him then that she wasn't merely surviving here. She belonged to wild places in ways he never could. Dawn arrived reluctantly, bringing mist that curled like smoke between the trees. They packed quickly, knowing lingering in one place made them easy prey. Celira led the way, her pace quicker than the day before. Thomas followed, his body sore from battle and restless sleep, but his spirit sharpened. Something had shifted after the fight with the plant. Their connection wasn't just necessity anymore. It was trust, forged in blood and fire. The jungle tested them again before noon. They came upon a river, its surface smooth as glass but crawling with shadows beneath. Long sinuous shapes darted just out of sight, and Thomas's stomach turned. He'd seen enough nature documentaries to know those movements meant predators. Celira knelt by the bank, tasting the water and shaking her head. "Bad," she motioned upstream. "Safe. Cross." He nodded, relieved to have her guidance, though dread lingered in his chest. They followed the river's edge for hours, the humidity clinging to their skin like a second layer. The sounds of the water masked other noises, making every step feel blind. Thomas gripped his machete tighter, his knuckles white. Celira kept glancing toward the water, her unease plain. When she finally stopped raising a hand, he froze instantly. The water was rippling, not from current, but from something vast rising just beneath the surface. With a sudden roar, a reptilian head broke free, jaws lined with rows of serrated teeth snapping shut, where Celira had stood seconds before. She shoved Thomas aside as another head surged from the water, attached to the same massive body. A hydra-like beast, its scales glistening, dragged itself from the river with terrifying force. The ground shook as it advanced, hissing and bellowing. Thomas scrambled to his feet, heart hammering. His machete looked pitiful compared to the monster before them. But retreat wasn't an option. The beast was blocking their path, and the river behind it was teeming with more predators. Celira drew her dagger again, her face set with grim determination. She looked at Thomas, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Fight!" He wanted to argue, to tell her they couldn't win, but her resolve left no room for doubt. So he raised his blade, legs trembling, and stood by her side. The creature lunged, one head snapping toward him, another toward her. Thomas rolled aside, slashing at the scaly neck. Sparks flying as steel glanced off armor-like hide. Celira darted under the second head, driving her dagger into a softer seam of flesh between scales. The beast shrieked, recoiling, but only grew more enraged. Its tails lashed out, whipping across the ground and knocking Thomas sprawling. He gasped as the air left his lungs, barely rolling aside before a head smashed down where he had been lying. Panic threatened to consume him, but then he heard Celira's cry, fierce, defiant. She had leapt onto the creature's back, clinging to ridges of bone as it thrashed violently. Thomas forced himself up, his vision swimming. He couldn't let her fight alone. He charged, climbing onto the beast's side and driving his machete again and again into the thinner scales near its jaw. Blood, dark and foul, sprayed across him, the stench overwhelming. The monster twisted, throwing them both violently into the dirt. For a moment, Thomas lay stunned, ears ringing, the world spinning. Celira staggered to her feet, her dagger still in hand. She dragged Thomas upright, their bodies bruised but unbroken. Together they circled the beast, searching for another weakness. It reared back, all its head snapping and hissing in unison. The fight was far from over. Yet even as terror gripped him, Thomas felt the same fire as before, the reckless courage that had saved her from the plant. This was what it meant to fight alongside her, to stand in the face of monsters no human was meant to face, and refuse to bow. The jungle was merciless, but so were they. And as the Hydra beast charged again, both human and alien braced themselves side by side, ready to defy the impossible once more. The jungle seemed to hold its breath as the Hydra beast lunged again. Thomas and Celira split instinctively, flanking the creature. Its head snapped between them, undecided which to crush first. Thomas's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst from his chest, but adrenaline kept him moving. He wasn't fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for her. The creature's tails whipped out, smashing trees into splinters. One lashed across the ground, grazing Thomas's leg and sending him sprawling. Pain flared hot, but he forced himself up, biting down a cry. He had no time for weakness. Celira darted in close, agile as the vines that had once ensnared her, slashing across the beast's exposed throat seam. Blood gushed, steaming where it hit the earth, but the monster barely faltered. Its other heads lunged at her, snapping like thunder. Thomas roared, charging forward with reckless abandon. He jammed his machete deep into the beast's eye, feeling the hot resistance as the creature screamed and writhed. The sound was a bone-shaking roar that echoed through the entire jungle. Celira seized the chance, leaping onto its back once more. She dug her dagger between scales, climbing toward the base of its central head. Thomas held its attention, hacking wildly, ducking as another jaw snapped shut inches from his skull. Sweat and blood blurred his vision, but he refused to falter. Every second he fought was another second she needed. At last she reached her mark. With a furious cry, Celira plunged her blade deep into the beast's neck seam, driving it with all her strength. The creature convulsed violently, its many heads thrashing in agony. Thomas was thrown to the ground by the force, rolling away just in time to avoid being crushed under its collapsing weight. The jungle shook as the Hydra beast fell, its final scream fading into the mist. For a long moment silence followed, broken only by Thomas's ragged breaths. He pushed himself up, limbs trembling, and staggered toward Celira. She was kneeling beside the corpse, bloodied but alive. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her face streaked with grime, but her eyes burned with victory. He dropped beside her, laughing breathlessly. We actually did it." She tilted her head, not understanding the words but catching the meaning in his tone. A faint smile tugged at her lips before she slumped against him. Exhaustion overtook them both, but relief was stronger. Against all odds, they had killed the monster. By midday, the stench of the carcass drew scavengers. Winged predators circled above, and smaller creatures slithered from the undergrowth, eager to feast. Celira tugged Thomas's arm, urging him to move. "Go," she insisted. He nodded, forcing his aching body onward. Leaving the beast behind, they stumbled deeper into the jungle, each step heavy but necessary. The land shifted as they pressed on. Trees grew sparser, replaced by jagged stone rising from the ground like the spines of some buried leviathan. Strange ruins peeked through the foliage, shattered pillars and broken archways, remnants of a forgotten civilization. Thomas slowed, awe in his voice. "People lived here?" He brushed moss off a carved stone face, its alien features staring back at him. Celira's gaze darkened. She knelt, touching the carvings with reverence, whispering words in her own tongue. Thomas didn't need to understand to feel the weight of it. This place meant something to her. Perhaps it was her ancestors. Perhaps it was a reminder of all that had been lost. He stayed quiet, giving her space. As they moved deeper into the ruins, the air grew colder. The jungle sounds quieted, replaced by a low hum that seemed to come from the stones themselves. Thomas felt it vibrating in his bones, unsettling yet strangely alluring. Celira's expression hardened. She knew this place, and it scared her. For the first time, Thomas saw genuine fear flicker in her eyes. Nightfall found them taking shelter beneath a half-collapsed dome, its ceiling still etched with glowing symbols. The fire they built seemed small against the alien architecture looming above. Thomas sat close to her, watching the flickering light play across her green skin. "You know this place?" he said softly, more statement than question. She nodded, eyes distant. "Old home? Broken." He wanted to ask more, but exhaustion won. He slept fitfully, dreams filled with strange whispers and flickering shadows that seemed to slither through the ruins. When he woke, Celira was already on her feet, staring at the horizon. The first rays of dawn painted her in gold, but her expression was grim. She motioned for him to rise quickly. Danger was near. They barely had time to gather their things before the jungle erupted with sound. From the ruins emerged figures, warriors clad in scavenged armor, their skin marked with tribal paint. They were neither human nor like Celira, but something in between. Their eyes glowed faintly in the mist, and their weapons were a mix of steel and bone. Thomas's grip tightened on his machete. The warriors circled, speaking in guttural tones. Celira answered them sharply in her language, her voice commanding but strained. Thomas couldn't understand, but he could read body language. This was not a friendly encounter. One of the warriors stepped forward, his weapon raised, barking a demand. Celira's jaw clenched and she shook her head. The response was swift. The warrior struck at the ground near her feet, the blade sparking off stone. Thomas stepped between them before he could think, his machete raised defensively. "Back off," he growled, though he knew they didn't understand. Still, the intent was clear. The warriors paused, murmuring among themselves. Celira glanced at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. The standoff stretched tense and silent until the lead warrior finally lowered his blade. He gestured sharply, motioning for them to follow. Thomas hesitated, but Celira touched his arm gently. "Go," she whispered. Reluctantly, he nodded. Together, they were led deeper into the ruins, surrounded by watchful eyes and armed hands. They were brought to a vast chamber, its walls lined with ancient carvings, glowing faintly with energy. At its center burned a pit of strange blue fire, casting eerie light across the assembled tribe. The leader spoke again, voice echoing, and the others responded with a chant that sent shivers down Thomas's spine. Whatever ritual they had walked into, it was dangerous. Celira stepped forward, defiance in her stance. She shouted words Thomas couldn't follow, her voice rising like a battle cry. The tribe's reaction was immediate, gasps, murmurs, even shouts of anger. The leader advanced, face twisted with rage. Thomas tensed, raising his blade, ready to fight a hopeless battle if he had to. But then the chamber itself seemed to respond. The carvings glowed brighter, the hum deepening into a resonant pulse that shook the air. The tribe froze, fear replacing fury. Celira turned to Thomas, her eyes blazing with urgency. "Run!" she hissed. He hesitated, torn between flight and fight. But the growing power in the room left little choice. They bolted, ducking past startled warriors and racing through the ruins. The humming grew louder, almost deafening as the ground trembled beneath their feet. Something ancient had been awakened, and the tribe's shouts turned from anger to terror. Thomas didn't know what force they had unleashed, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was coming was far worse than the Hydra beast, or the tribe that wanted them dead. The ruins shuddered as if alive, ancient stone groaning under unseen weight. Thomas and Celira sprinted through collapsing halls, chased by a thunder that wasn't just falling rock. Behind them, the tribe screamed and scattered, their chants replaced by panicked cries. The air thickened, charged with raw energy, every breath tasting like metal and storm. Thomas risked a glance back. From the chamber they had fled, blue fire erupted skyward, tearing through the dome in a blinding column. Figures were silhouetted against the light, writhing as shadows clung to their forms. He didn't stop to understand. It was enough to know that something had awakened, and it didn't care who lived or died. Celira pulled him toward a narrow stair carved into stone, half swallowed by roots. They descended quickly, boots striking uneven steps. The walls around them pulsed with faint light, runes flaring as if reacting to their presence. "What the hell is this place?" Thomas muttered, but Celira only shook her head. Whatever she knew, words were not enough. The stairs spat them out into a cavern vast enough to house a city. Pillars of stone reached into darkness, and in the center of it all lay a massive structure, half machine, half temple. Its surface shimmered with alien script, humming in sync with the tremors above. Thomas slowed, awe overtaking fear for a brief moment. This This is a reactor. Selira moved with grim purpose. She pressed her hand to a console embedded in the structure, her voice trembling as she spoke words older than the jungle. Symbols lit beneath her touch, responding like long-slumbering nerves. Thomas stood guard, scanning the shadows for movement. Every instinct screamed that the danger wasn't over. His instincts were right. From the darkness emerged the tribe's leader. Battered but unbroken, his armor cracked and smeared with blood. His eyes glowed brighter now, fueled by whatever power had been unleashed. He bared teeth at them, weapon gleaming with unnatural light. Selira froze at the console, torn between fight and ritual. Thomas stepped forward, machete raised. His body screamed in protest, exhaustion dragging at his limbs. But he planted his feet firm. "You want her, you go through me." The words meant nothing to the alien, but the defiance was clear. The leader snarled, charging with frightening speed. Steel clashed in the depths, sparks flying like stars. The impact jarred Thomas's bones. The warrior's blows were monstrous, fueled by power Thomas didn't understand. Every strike forced him back, his arms screaming with strain. But he refused to fall. Behind him, he could hear Selira's voice rising in steady cadence, the console responding, the reactor thrumming louder with each syllable. He had to buy her time. The leader feinted, then struck low, blade slashing across Thomas's side. Pain exploded white-hot, stealing his breath. He staggered but didn't drop. Gritting his teeth, he swung upward, catching the alien off guard and carving across his chest. The warrior roared in rage, blood spraying, but still he advanced. Thomas knew he couldn't win this duel forever. Suddenly the cavern shook violently. Light erupted from the reactor, engulfing Selira in a halo of energy. Her voice carried like thunder, every word echoing in the chamber. The tribe's leader faltered, his confidence cracking as he realized too late what was happening. Thomas seized the opening, driving his blade deep into the alien's chest. The warrior convulsed, eyes wide with shock. Thomas twisted the machete free as the enemy collapsed to the stone floor, lifeless at last. He stood panting, blood dripping from his side, every breath a war. But there was no time to savor victory. The reactor was fully awake now, the cavern trembling like the heartbeat of a giant. Selira turned to him, her eyes glowing with the same blue fire as the runes. She looked transformed, both terrifying and magnificent. For a moment, Thomas feared she was no longer herself. But then she stumbled forward, catching his arm, grounding herself in his presence. "Help! Me!" she gasped, voice heavy with strain. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her steady. "Tell me what to do." She gestured weakly toward the reactor's core, where a sphere of light pulsed dangerously. The stone around it cracked, fissures spreading as if the very world was tearing apart. He understood instantly. It wasn't just a power source. It was a prison. Something inside wanted out. "Not again," Thomas growled, staggering toward the core with her. Together they pressed against the console, forcing the symbols into a final sequence. The sphere resisted, pulsing violently, but their combined will pushed back. The chamber roared, light swallowing everything, until at last the core dimmed, the fissures sealing with a sigh. Silence fell. The hum subsided to a low throb, steady and controlled. Selira collapsed against him, drained but alive. He lowered them both to the floor, clutching his side where blood seeped. "We did it," he whispered, though exhaustion made his voice faint. She met his eyes, and for the first time since they met, she smiled fully. They rested there for what felt like hours, until the tremors ceased entirely. When they finally rose, the ruins seemed calmer, the oppressive weight lifted. The tribe was gone, scattered by fear or destroyed by the awakening. The jungle above was eerily quiet, as if the land itself was holding its breath in relief. Climbing back to the surface was agony, but Thomas endured, guided by Selira's steady hand. When they broke through into sunlight, the warmth felt unreal, almost holy. The jungle stretched endless around them, but no longer hostile. For the first time since arriving, Thomas believed they had a chance to make it out alive. They set up camp at the jungle's edge, overlooking a wide river that glimmered under starlight. Thomas lay back, listening to the alien night, his wounds bound by Selira's careful hands. She hummed softly, a tune from her people soothing in its strange beauty. He closed his eyes, feeling safer than he ever thought possible in this world. Days passed and their bond grew unspoken, but undeniable. They moved together, trusted each other, saved one another without hesitation. The jungle remained dangerous, but they faced it as one. Each glance, each touch, carried more meaning than words could ever bridge. They were no longer just survivors, they were partners. One evening, as they rested by the fire, Selira touched his chest lightly. Human, strong. The words were halting, but the look in her eyes spoke volumes. He chuckled softly, replying, "Only because of you." Their laughter mingled with the crackle of flames, easing the weight of everything they had endured. At dawn, they set their sights beyond the jungle. Somewhere ahead lay freedom, maybe even a way home. But Thomas knew something had changed irreversibly. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living for her and she for him. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The jungle had tried to devour them both, had thrown monsters and ruins and death in their path. But in the end, it had failed. Humanity's courage, alien resilience, and the bond forged in fire and blood had triumphed. And for the first time in a long time, Thomas dared to believe in tomorrow.